It started like any other Monday morning. Sunlight stretched across the blacktop. The smell of damp wood chips filled the air, and the shouts and laughter of children echoed through the playground of a small elementary school in Indiana. It was the kind of place where nothing major ever happened, where parents felt safe sending their kids, and the biggest problem a principal usually faced was a student sneaking candy into class. But that morning, Principal Lorraine Nash noticed something she couldn't explain. At first, it seemed like harmless roughhousing. Boys darting around the swing set, a girl whispering urgently to a friend, a group of kids standing unusually still at the edge of the field. But then came the moment that changed everything. One child froze in place, staring blankly toward the fence line. Another slowly bent down and began digging through the dirt with bare hands. Their movements were off, robotic, almost trance-like. And when Principal Nash approached them, she saw their eyes. Vacant. Glazed. As if they were somewhere else entirely. That was the first time she got the sense that something far more sinister was happening, and it wouldn't be the last. Now, before we go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something was wrong, even when everyone else said everything was fine? That quiet inner voice that whispers, "Look closer." That's exactly where this story begins. This isn't just about a playground. This is about a small-town mystery that spiraled into something no one could have predicted. A story so bizarre, so chilling, that it pulled in law enforcement, behavioral psychologists, and eventually the FBI. And by the time it was over, the people in that town were asking questions they never thought they'd ask about their own children, their own community, and the systems meant to keep them safe. This video will take you behind the scenes of what really happened when one principal followed her instincts and uncovered something buried just beneath the surface of normal. Let me be clear, this isn't a ghost story. This isn't clickbait. This is based on a real situation that caught the attention of national agencies. And trust me, by the time you reach the end of this video, the final puzzle piece will drop into place. You're going to get the answers you came here for. But I need you to stay with me. Not just because every twist builds on the last, but because what you're about to hear might change the way you look at certain behaviors, certain warning signs, and even certain technologies forever. Some stories are just too important to skim past. Look, I know you've got options right now. You could click away to another video, maybe something funny, maybe something about celebrity drama or trending cars or bizarre life hacks. But this story is different. This one digs deeper. And it starts with a woman who simply wouldn't let go of a feeling. A woman who trusted her instincts over the opinions of her peers. A woman who made a single phone call that set off a chain reaction no one was prepared for. Principal Lorraine Nash had been at Woodpine Elementary for over 14 years. The kind of principal everyone liked, firm but fair, warm with the kids, respected by parents. She knew every student's name, their siblings, even which ones were allergic to bees. But over the past few weeks, she'd started to notice little things. Kids spacing out in class. Sudden emotional swings. Drawings left behind on desks that didn't make sense. Dark figures, spiral patterns, odd symbols. She logged these things in her personal notebook, but didn't act on them. Not yet. She told herself maybe it was stress, or something viral on social media. That all changed after the recess incident. The children didn't respond when she called their names. That blankness in their eyes wasn't tiredness or boredom. It was something else. When she asked one little boy what he was doing, he simply said, "They told me to dig." She asked who, and he just shrugged and kept going. By the time she ushered them back inside, her heart was pounding, but she still didn't know why. She reviewed the playground security footage that afternoon, expecting to see something, maybe a fight, maybe a stranger lurking nearby. But what she saw made her skin crawl. The footage didn't line up with her memory. One camera caught a wide-angle view of the sandbox. For 5 full minutes, nearly a dozen kids were moving in perfect unison, walking in circles, stopping at the exact same time, bending down in synchronization. No one was laughing. No one was talking. Just silent, patterned movement. It looked rehearsed. Like a ritual. But the kicker? According to the timestamp, this happened 10 minutes before she saw the kids acting strangely, meaning they had snapped out of it and then gone right back in. Lorraine sent the footage to the school district's security team. 2 days later, she got a response. A vague message saying they'd look into it. But no follow-up ever came. No recommendations, no visits, nothing. That's when she realized if she didn't push further, no one else would. So, she did something most school administrators would never consider. She made a call to a friend she hadn't spoken to in years. A man named Ray Salazar, a retired behavioral analyst who had once worked as a liaison with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. She didn't tell the school board. She didn't tell the staff. She told Ray everything. And when she showed him the footage, he fell completely silent. Then he looked her in the eye and said, "I need to make a call." So now, let me ask you directly, what would you do in Lorraine's position? Would you back off, tell yourself it's all just kid stuff, and let it go? Or would you trust your gut and dig deeper, even if it meant risking your job, your reputation, and possibly your safety? Because Lorraine didn't just open a door that day. She kicked it off its hinges. What started as a hunch about strange behavior on a playground quickly escalated into something no one was equipped to handle. And as Ray's contacts in the Bureau got involved, more questions started to surface. Questions that pointed not just to psychological manipulation, but to an emerging technology that no one saw coming. This story touches everything: child psychology, artificial intelligence, experimental learning tools, and yes, even mind control theories that have haunted government files for decades. There's a reason the FBI doesn't jump into school matters unless something is very wrong. And once they saw what Lorraine had, they knew this wasn't an isolated case. It was spreading. So, if you're still watching, I need you to really hear this next part. You didn't just stumble onto a creepy school story. You've stepped into something deeper. Something layered. This story isn't just about a mystery. It's about the people who had the courage to confront it. It's about real danger, disguised as innocence. And by the time this story reaches its final chapter, you'll understand why the FBI still won't release certain documents related to what happened next. That's not hype. That's the truth. So stay with me. Because just when Lorraine thought things couldn't get stranger, just when she thought she'd seen the full extent of the problem, a parent came forward. Someone whose child had been acting even more erratically. Someone who found a small, seemingly harmless object buried in the child's backpack, an object no one could identify, not even the tech team at the Bureau. And when they ran tests on it, what they found shocked everyone. What was that object? Who put it there? And how did it end up in a third grader's possession? You'll find out. But first, let me take you back to the day the FBI showed up on campus. And everything changed. When the black SUVs rolled up to the staff parking lot that Thursday morning, Lorraine Nash stood at her office window and felt a knot form in her stomach. It wasn't just the presence of federal vehicles at her school. It was the expression on the face of the lead agent who stepped out. Calm, unreadable, but carrying that unmistakable sense of urgency. His name was Special Agent Grant Mercer, and he wasted no time. Within minutes, he'd requested access to the security system, spoken quietly with Ray Salazar, and asked Lorraine to gather a list of any students involved in unusual behavior over the past 2 months. No press. No school board alert. He made it clear they were to proceed as if everything was normal. But Lorraine could tell this was anything but. The days leading up to that visit had been a whirlwind of subtle observations and quiet dread. Lorraine had started staying late at the school, combing through reports, student files, and recess duty notes, looking for patterns. She'd even begun interviewing the kids, gently, cautiously, asking about their drawings, their sleep, their dreams. Many of them didn't remember acting strangely. A few did. One boy mentioned the voice, while another said she felt like her thoughts weren't hers. The staff had chalked it up to imagination, overstimulation, or perhaps some trending online challenge. Lorraine wasn't so sure anymore. She had caught whispers of deep learning AI behavior modification online, terms that sounded straight out of a conspiracy theory rabbit hole. But when she looked deeper, the connections were unsettling. Her own relationships began to shift under the weight of the mystery. Teachers she had worked with for years grew distant when she brought up her concerns. The school counselor advised her to take some time off, hinting that stress might be clouding her judgment. Even her longtime friend and assistant principal, Jeremy Banks, had begun acting strange, less engaged, more watchful. He was normally one of her biggest supporters, but now, every conversation with him felt filtered, as if he were trying to steer her away from certain topics. She started wondering if someone was warning him, or if he'd seen something he wasn't ready to admit. The deeper Lorraine dug, the more she found threads that didn't quite connect, at least not in the way you'd expect. For instance, a new educational tool had recently been introduced to the school, a so-called cognitive engagement platform, donated through a tech grant from a private company Lorraine couldn't find much public information on. The program had only been implemented in a few classrooms, and oddly enough, many of the students showing strange behavior were from those exact rooms. She remembered sitting through the training seminar just a few weeks earlier, watching a sleek corporate rep named Maya present the benefits of interactive neuroadaptive learning. At the time, it seemed like just another flashy teaching app. Now, she couldn't shake the feeling that it might have been something else entirely. Lorraine had asked for a copy of the user data logs from the platform, hoping to verify if there was any overlap with the kids affected. Maya had promised to send it over, but days passed and nothing came. When Lorraine followed up, the rep was suddenly on leave, and the company's contact number went straight to voicemail. That's when she started to wonder if she was in over her head. Whatever this was, it wasn't limited to her school. She found mentions online of similar behavior surfacing in a few other districts, usually dismissed as unrelated incidents, sleepwalking, zoning out, hypnotic episodes. In every case, the schools had recently introduced a new tech-based curriculum tool. But those stories disappeared as quickly as they surfaced, buried by articles about classroom AI trends or viral TikTok pranks. It was like someone wanted the symptoms visible but the root cause invisible. And then came the object. It was small, barely larger than a thumbnail, and found tucked deep in the lining of a third grader's backpack. The child's mother, a woman named Cassandra Dorsey, had gone to clean out the bag over the weekend when she found it lodged inside a rip in the fabric. It didn't look dangerous, more like a novelty tech gadget, smooth and rounded with faint etching. But it had no brand, no serial number, and no obvious function. Cassandra brought it to Lorraine first thing Monday morning, worried it might be a tracker or a device from one of those smart toys she'd heard horror stories about. Lorraine turned it over in her hand and felt a weird static sensation on her fingertips. She knew immediately it didn't belong anywhere near a child. When the FBI examined it, they told Lorraine very little, only that the object was of interest. Agent Mercer instructed her to keep quiet and continue normal operations at the school while they monitored the situation from a distance. But Lorraine's mind refused to settle. She began to question everything, especially the people she thought she could trust. Jeremy had been one of the first staff members to embrace the new tech platform, praising it in faculty meetings, encouraging teachers to use it daily. Yet when she tried to talk to him about it recently, he got defensive, almost angry. He insisted there was no link, that kids were just acting out, and that her paranoia was spreading. But Lorraine had seen the way his hands trembled during their last conversation. The way he looked over her shoulder, checking to see who was listening. Then there was the school janitor, Mr. Collins, a quiet man in his 60s who had worked at Woodpine for decades. A few nights earlier, Lorraine had seen him on the security footage walking the halls long after his shift was over. He didn't seem to be cleaning. He was just standing in the hallway outside room 206, the very classroom where most of the strange incidents began. When she asked him about it the next morning, he claimed he'd stayed late fixing a leaky faucet. But Lorraine checked the maintenance logs. No report of any leak. Something didn't add up. Was he involved? Or had he seen something he wasn't supposed to? Even the parents started showing signs of suspicion. A few mothers in the pickup line exchanged worried glances, whispering to each other with tightly folded arms. One father, usually jovial and relaxed, confronted Lorraine in the parking lot and demanded to know what was happening with the school's weird new agenda. Rumors had started to spread, some claiming the school was testing a government program, others suggesting that the kids were being targeted for psychological experiments. And beneath all of it, Lorraine could feel it, the growing fear that something was moving just out of sight. Something bigger than her. Something she wasn't meant to uncover. She spent nights going through records, looking for anything that might offer clarity. A shipment slip, a grant application, a parent complaint. That's when she discovered that the school's application for the new tech platform hadn't come from her office. It had been submitted under her name, but the signature wasn't hers. And the timestamp showed it was filed on a weekend, when the building was supposed to be closed. When she checked the network logs, the request had been made from a staff computer. The same one assigned to Jeremy. Now the pieces were piling up, but they didn't form a clear picture. At least, not yet. Was Jeremy working with the company? Was Mr. Collins just in the wrong place at the wrong time? What was the true purpose of that strange object found in the backpack? Was this part of a larger experiment, a tech trial gone wrong, or something even darker? Lorraine felt herself sinking into questions that no longer had simple answers. And the worst part was, she had to keep pretending everything was fine. Every morning, she greeted parents with a smile, monitored recess with a clipboard, and nodded along in staff meetings, while inside, her mind raced through theories, suspects, and secrets. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. Because just as she began to think she was finally getting ahead of the mystery, just as she thought she had narrowed it down to a few possibilities, one of the children went missing. And this time, there was no video, no warning, no explanation. Only a single message, scribbled in a child's handwriting, left behind on a desk that read, "They said it's my turn." Lorraine barely slept the night the child went missing. The halls of Woodpine Elementary felt colder, quieter, like the building itself had inhaled and forgotten to breathe. Emergency protocols kicked in immediately. Local police took the lead, but the FBI remained tight-lipped. The missing student, 8-year-old Naomi Brooks, had been present at morning attendance and then vanished sometime between first recess and lunch. Her backpack was still in her cubby. Her jacket still hung by the door. But she was gone. No forced entry. No sign of struggle. No one saw her leave. The only clue, the eerie note in her handwriting, was now sealed in an evidence bag and taken by Agent Mercer. But Lorraine knew that message wasn't written freely. Naomi had never said anything about them before. And yet, there it was. They said it's my turn. The morning after Naomi's disappearance, Lorraine logged into the school's security system, determined to review every second of footage from every camera. But the main server was down. Not only that, but the backup drive she kept locked in her office cabinet was missing. She hadn't told anyone about that backup, not even Jeremy. She stared at the empty drawer, her hands trembling. There was no sign of forced entry. Someone had either known it was there, or guessed with terrifying accuracy. When she reported it to the FBI, they offered no immediate answers, only reassurances that they were looking into it. But Lorraine could feel the shift in their demeanor. Mercer was no longer treating her like a concerned principal. He was watching her closely, measuring her words, as if he wasn't sure whether she was a reliable partner or just another variable in a rapidly unraveling equation. And then came the warning. It wasn't a call. It wasn't even a direct threat. It was a note, slipped into her office mailbox, sandwiched between budget reports and a substitute request form. Typed. No signature. Just 12 words. Drop it, Lorraine. Or more children will start disappearing like Naomi. Her stomach flipped as she read it over and over. Was it someone on staff? A parent? Someone inside the FBI trying to silence her? She couldn't report it, not yet. She needed to know who she could trust. So she kept the note hidden, locked inside her glove compartment, and tried to act as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The whispers around school grew louder. Naomi's friends were now drawing the same strange symbols that others had been sketching weeks earlier. Teachers dismissed it as mimicry, a trauma response. But Lorraine had the growing suspicion that something was being passed between them, like a digital infection, but one you couldn't trace through code. She tried to confide in Jeremy again, bringing him into her office after school one day to share her concerns. But as she spoke, he looked at her with a new kind of detachment. His answers were short, scripted. He avoided eye contact. When she asked him directly about the missing security footage, his face darkened. "Maybe you're just tired," he said. Maybe you're starting to see things that aren't there. She wanted to scream. She knew what gaslighting sounded like. And coming from Jeremy, it hurt even more. That night, driven by a desperation she hadn't felt since the early days of her teaching career, Lorraine did something she hadn't done in years. She drove out to her old mentor's home in a nearby town. Her name was Evelyn Maris, a former principal who had retired early after a mysterious student incident back in 2014. At the time, Lorraine had admired Evelyn's strength, but never understood why she'd walked away so suddenly. Now she wondered if Evelyn had seen something too. Evelyn greeted her like no time had passed. The gray in her hair had grown, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. When Lorraine explained what had been happening, carefully omitting Naomi's disappearance at first, Evelyn listened in silence. And then, after a long pause, she said something that chilled Lorraine to the core. "It's happening again." Lorraine sat frozen. Evelyn pulled out an old file box from her linen closet, filled with yellowing documents, newspaper clippings, and hand-drawn maps. She explained that over a decade ago, a similar tech grant had been offered to her school, under a different name, from a different company, but promising the same thing: optimized learning, AI-enhanced engagement, neural calibration. And just like at Woodpine, kids had started behaving strangely. A few reported hearing voices, drawing the same spiral-like shapes, and blacking out during class. Then one day, a fifth grader had vanished. Evelyn had buried the story under pressure from both the district and a private consulting firm that claimed they could handle it discreetly. She had always regretted staying quiet. Now Lorraine knew this wasn't new. It wasn't isolated. And whatever was behind it had been operating longer than she'd realized. But the deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. Because when she returned to her car outside Evelyn's house, the rear windshield had been smashed. Nothing was taken. It was a message, a reminder that she was being watched. Back at school, things continued to spiral. A teacher, Miss Hargrove, known for her tough but fair demeanor, requested a sudden transfer. No explanation, just a vague mention of not feeling safe anymore. Lorraine caught her before she left and asked her to talk. Hargrove refused. But as she walked away, she muttered under her breath, "It's not just the kids anymore. It's in us now, too." Lorraine didn't know what she meant, but it stayed with her like a splinter under the skin. Then, just as Lorraine began piecing together a timeline of events, plotting the days when each child began acting out, matching them against app usage logs she managed to retrieve through an old IT contact, she encountered her most unexpected setback yet. The data she had worked tirelessly to collect, hours of cross-checking student access and behavior patterns, was gone. Wiped. Her laptop had been remotely accessed and factory reset overnight. She called IT. They claimed there was no record of remote activity. But Lorraine knew better. This wasn't just someone trying to hide the truth. It was someone inside the system, someone with access and intent. Even worse, she received an encrypted email later that day from a throwaway address with no sender name. The subject line read, "You're getting too close." Inside, there was only one attachment, a photo. It was blurry, clearly taken from a distance, but unmistakable. It was her, standing in Evelyn's driveway. That meant whoever was behind this wasn't just watching the school. They were following her, tracking her movements, and using fear as a leash. Lorraine realized she was running out of people to trust, out of leads to follow, and now, out of time. The only thread left was an encrypted file Evelyn had handed her during their meeting, a decades-old student report from the original incident, one that had never been officially filed. It mentioned a name. A student who had reportedly recovered from the early symptoms before vanishing 6 months later. But there was something familiar about that name, something Lorraine couldn't quite place. She brought the file home, locked it in her drawer, and decided to sleep on it. And that night, at 2:13 a.m., she awoke to the sound of her front door creaking open. Someone was in her house. Lorraine's breath caught in her throat as the hinges moaned with deliberate slowness, slicing through the silence of her home like a blade. Her heart pounded in her chest, every beat echoing louder than the last as she reached for the small flashlight in her nightstand drawer. She didn't dare speak, didn't dare make a sound. Her fingers trembled as she clicked it on, casting a narrow cone of light toward the hallway. For a long moment, nothing moved, and then, barely audible, came the creak of a floorboard near the kitchen, followed by the subtle whoosh of air, as if someone had just stepped past the threshold of her living room. Lorraine slipped out of bed, crouched low, and made her way toward the door, flashlight in one hand and the file Evelyn had given her clutched tightly in the other. She didn't know if this was a break-in meant to intimidate her, or something more, but either way, she wasn't going to give whoever it was the satisfaction of fear. But as she reached the hallway and swung the light toward the front door, it stood ajar, swaying gently on its hinges, the night wind whispering through the crack. No one was there. No footprints. No damage. Just an envelope, placed delicately on her welcome mat. Lorraine snatched it up with gloved hands and slammed the door shut, bolting every lock. Inside the envelope was a single photo, printed on glossy paper. It was an old class picture, faded but unmistakably from Woodpine Elementary. Circa 2006, based on the clothing and hairstyles. And in the front row, circled in red marker, was a boy she didn't recognize. No name. No accompanying note. But what sent a chill down her spine was the teacher standing beside the students. It was Evelyn Maris. And directly behind her, partially obscured by the sun's glare, was a man Lorraine had never seen before, wearing a visitor's badge, watching the children. And just barely visible through the reflection, he appeared to be looking directly at the camera, his expression blank, unreadable. The next morning, before she could process what she'd found, Lorraine received a panicked call from Janice Whitmore, one of the school's special education aides and a close colleague for years. Janice's voice cracked as she begged Lorraine to come to her house. She wouldn't say why over the phone. Lorraine drove there immediately, pushing through red lights and back roads. When she arrived, Janice opened the door with shaking hands and pulled her inside. On her kitchen table was an envelope nearly identical to the one Lorraine had found. Inside was a photo too, but not from the past. It was current. It showed Janice at the grocery store, reaching for a box of cereal with her daughter beside her. A caption had been typed across the bottom in crude, blocky font. "This is your only warning. Stay silent, or she disappears next." Lorraine's stomach turned. This was bigger than she'd feared. It wasn't just about her or Naomi, it was expanding, consuming the people around her. Someone had access to them. Someone was watching closely enough to capture private moments and turn them into threats. But why Janice? Why now? Janice sobbed as she confessed something Lorraine hadn't expected. She'd worked briefly for a consulting firm back in 2014, just after Evelyn's abrupt departure. The firm specialized in educational technology solutions and had partnered with multiple school districts, including Woodpine, for beta testing emerging AI platforms in classroom settings. She thought it was a side gig, nothing more than data entry and feedback analysis. But she now realized that firm, called Velocin at the time, was the precursor to NeuralSpark. Same founders. Same internal protocols. The firm had simply rebranded after several lawsuits mysteriously disappeared from public record. And then came the curveball Lorraine wasn't ready for. Jeremy, her longtime friend, the IT director, the one who had become distant and robotic lately, had also worked briefly for Velocin as a contractor during his early tech career. She remembered now how he'd once brushed it off as just a job, barely worth mentioning. But she could no longer ignore the timeline. He was connected. Whether knowingly or not, he had once been inside the machine that was now consuming her school from the inside out. It didn't mean he was guilty, but it meant something. And it complicated everything. Lorraine left Janice's house with a fresh knot in her stomach and a racing mind. The moment she returned to her car, her phone vibrated with a new notification, an email from a blocked sender. The subject line read, "You're chasing ghosts." She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a link to a private video file. Against her better judgment, she clicked play. What she saw made her blood run cold. It was security footage, grainy and unstable, but it clearly showed Naomi Brooks walking hand in hand with someone through the rear exit of the school building. The time stamp matched the exact window she'd gone missing. But the figure walking with Naomi had no identifiable features. Their face was blurred, not pixelated like a normal compression artifact, but purposefully scrubbed. And Naomi didn't appear frightened. She looked calm, like she was following someone she trusted. It shattered everything Lorraine thought she knew. Naomi hadn't been taken by force. She'd left willingly, with someone who had access to the building and enough influence to convince a child to go with them without a struggle. Was it someone on staff? A parent? Or had Naomi been manipulated by something larger, something embedded in the very tech the school had been pushing? Lorraine remembered the subtle conditioning programs, digital feedback loops that rewarded attention, shaped emotional responses, and quietly rewired patterns of trust. Was it possible that Naomi had been trained to obey someone she didn't consciously know? The implications were terrifying. And then, just when Lorraine thought the day couldn't get any stranger, she received a call from the FBI. Agent Mercer was on the line, but his tone had shifted. Gone was the calm professionalism. Now he sounded rushed, agitated. "We need to talk," he said. "Now." She agreed to meet at the Bureau's local field office. But as she turned her car onto the main road, another call came through, this one from an unknown number. She answered hesitantly. A robotic voice spoke. "If you meet with him, you'll never see Naomi again." The line went dead. Lorraine pulled over, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She was being forced into a decision with no good outcome. Talk to the FBI and risk losing her only chance at finding Naomi, or walk away and protect her friends, her staff, her sanity. But even that choice wouldn't be simple, because the photo of the circled boy from 2006 still haunted her. And just that morning, before leaving for Janice's, she'd found something even more disturbing in an old yearbook Evelyn had left her. That boy, the one circled in red, he bore an uncanny resemblance to a substitute teacher who'd recently been hired at Woodpine. His name was Daniel Cross. But back in 2006, he went by another name, one Lorraine now knew she had to keep hidden at all costs. Lorraine barely made it to the FBI office before pulling into a quiet gas station on the edge of town, hands trembling, her chest tight with panic. The robotic voice replayed in her mind on a cruel loop. "If you meet with him, you'll never see Naomi again." She tried to brush it off as a bluff, but deep down she felt something shift, something primal. This wasn't just about school surveillance or old files or digital footprints anymore. This was about control, about someone, or some group, watching her every step, studying her every move, and pulling strings she didn't even realize were connected. The stakes had changed, and she wasn't sure if she was being protected by the FBI or being watched by them, too. She couldn't trust anyone completely, not Agent Mercer, not Jeremy, and maybe not even Janice. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alone. As she sat in the driver's seat staring blankly at the gas station sign flickering in the distance, her phone buzzed again. She nearly dropped it. This time it was a text. No contact name. Just a number she didn't recognize. The message was short, just 3 words. "Check your rear view." Her throat closed. Slowly, she turned her head and looked into the mirror. Parked a few spaces back, partially hidden in the shadows, was a dark gray SUV, no front license plate, heavily tinted windows, engine idling. It wasn't just waiting there. It was watching her. Lorraine's heart hammered so loudly in her chest she could barely hear herself think. Every instinct told her to drive, to get away fast, but something else kept her rooted, paralyzed. What if she drove off, and they followed her? What if they were waiting for her to lead them to someone else? Janice, Evelyn, Naomi? She hit the gas anyway, pulling out with a squeal of tires, glancing in the mirror again to see the SUV pull out 2 beats later. Not aggressive. Not fast. Just there. Tracking her. She turned down side streets, looped around neighborhoods, doubled back twice, and ran a red light just to see what it would do. Each time, the SUV followed, never closing the gap, but never losing her either. Her paranoia ratcheted higher with each turn. She had no idea where to go. She couldn't go home. Couldn't go to the school. couldn't go to Janice's place and risk drawing attention to her friend. And the FBI was now off the table. She finally turned into a busy strip mall and slipped behind a delivery truck, waiting for the SUV to pass, but when she looked again, it was gone. No sign. Like it had vanished into thin air. That should have comforted her, but it only made her more afraid. Whoever was behind this wasn't sloppy. They knew how to disappear. When she got back to her house, the porch light was off. That was the first clue something was wrong. She always left it on when she left, and the switch was inside. She approached slowly, holding her phone like a weapon, thumb hovering over the call button for 911. The front door was locked, but the deadbolt had been undone. She stepped inside cautiously, whispering Naomi's name like a question, even though she knew she wouldn't be there. The silence was suffocating. Every creak of the floor, every hum of the refrigerator sounded like a threat. She walked into the living room and saw what had changed. Someone had gone through her things. Not in a ransacked way, but with precision. A single drawer was open, the one where she kept old photos and letters. And there, on top, was a note written in looping, perfect cursive. Some secrets should stay buried. Or others will be. That night, Lorraine couldn't sleep. She locked every door, blocked every window, and still felt exposed. Her mind was spinning with questions. What had she gotten herself into? Was Naomi the target, or just the bait? Had Evelyn known this was coming? Why hadn't she warned her sooner? And most haunting of all, who was Daniel Cross really? If he had changed his name, what was he hiding? And how had he managed to insert himself back into the school without raising red flags? The more she thought about it, the more she realized there were pieces missing, crucial details about the old school files, the experimental software, and the rebranding of the companies involved. She remembered how the school board had once mentioned budget reallocations and technology grants, all funneled through vague corporate partners whose names had changed 3 times in 5 years. The more she dug into her memory, the more it seemed like this wasn't negligence or coincidence. It was orchestration. The next morning, Lorraine went to the school to try and keep up the appearance of normalcy. She needed access to her office. She needed to check Naomi's old school-issued tablet to see if there was anything in the usage logs. Maybe she could track where she'd been or who she'd been in contact with. But when she arrived, the IT room was sealed. A sign taped to the door read, "System maintenance in progress. Do not enter." That wasn't standard protocol. No one had informed her, and she was still the acting principal. She tried using her master key, but the lock had been changed. Frustrated and panicked, she stormed down the hallway to find Jeremy, but he wasn't there. His office was empty, the blinds pulled tight. A custodian passing by stopped when he saw Lorraine pacing outside the office door. "He didn't come in today," he said. "Left some kind of message with the front desk. Said he had a family emergency." She called his phone. Straight to voicemail. Then came the news that truly shook her. One of the kindergarten teachers, Ms. Haley Shaw, had not reported in either. And unlike Jeremy, she'd never missed a day in 5 years. Lorraine asked the office to call her emergency contacts. No answer. The police were notified. That afternoon, her car was found in the school parking lot, driver's door open, keys still in the ignition. Lorraine sat at her desk, blinds drawn, clutching Naomi's last known tablet in her lap. Her hands shook as she powered it on. A strange screen appeared, one she hadn't seen before. A login prompt with a logo she didn't recognize, something sleek and corporate, with the word Cerebrum flashing underneath. The tablet had been remotely accessed. Recently. Files were missing. Others encrypted. One video file remained unmarked, no name, no timestamp. She hesitated, then tapped it open. The screen flickered to life. Naomi was sitting in a dimly lit room, her face calm, expression blank. Her voice was soft. "Hi, Miss Lorraine. If you're watching this, it means they're close. I know what they want. I just don't know how to stop it." The video ended. Lorraine stared at the black screen, her blood turning to ice. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was the next target. Lorraine sat frozen in her office, staring at the lifeless tablet screen, trying to piece together what she'd just seen. Naomi's video replayed in her mind with eerie clarity, her calm voice, the detached tone, the flicker of something behind her eyes that didn't seem entirely her. The more she thought about it, the more she realized the message wasn't just a warning, it was a carefully constructed puzzle. Naomi wasn't just scared. She was trying to leave a trail. But to what? And why the name Cerebrum? The more Lorraine dug into it, the more that word began to haunt her. She typed it into her laptop search bar, but most of what came up was medical jargon, brain-related tech, experimental memory mapping, deep learning platforms. But one article buried deep in the search results caught her attention. It was an archived press release from 5 years ago, mentioning a now-defunct educational startup called Cerebrum Learning Systems, which claimed to offer adaptive behavior models for early cognitive development. It had been part of a pilot program, funded by a now-dissolved tech investment group, rolled out to a handful of U.S. schools for data-rich behavioral optimization. One of those schools? Hers. She scrolled down the article and stopped cold. The listed CEO at the time, Daniel Cross. The name felt like a slap. How could this have been missed? How could no one have flagged this during his onboarding? She opened her inbox, combing through background check reports, teacher certification logs, application documents. And that's when she saw it. His name hadn't been Daniel Cross when he was hired. He'd used a variation, Daniel Kraus, claiming dual citizenship and a hyphenated maternal surname. But the ID numbers didn't match. Lorraine's stomach churned. Either someone forged the documents or someone inside the system helped him do it. Panicked, she called Janice, desperate for someone to process this with. But Janice's voice on the other end of the line was quiet, too quiet. Not surprised. Not even concerned. She let Lorraine finish speaking before calmly replying, "I was wondering when you'd find that name." Lorraine fell silent. "You knew," she whispered. Janice sighed, and for the first time, she didn't sound like a friend. She sounded like someone keeping secrets. "I didn't want to be part of it. But I didn't have a choice. None of us did." When the pilot started, it was sold as a harmless way to track engagement, improve learning outcomes. But it changed. It got invasive. It stopped measuring attention spans and started mapping patterns. Who they played with. Who they avoided. Their fears. Their tells. Their triggers. And someone kept the data, even after the program was shut down. Lorraine felt her knees buckle as she leaned against the wall for support. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, her voice cracking. Janice replied with a chilling honesty. "Because people who ask too many questions tend to disappear. Just like Evelyn did." The line went dead. Lorraine's mind spiraled, retracing every moment, every strange behavior on the playground, every oddly timed interaction, every time Naomi said something that seemed too grown-up, too aware. Was Naomi part of something bigger? Was she being monitored not just by strangers, but by people Lorraine knew and trusted? She turned back to her screen, running a deep scan on the tablet. And then, buried in a hidden system folder, she found it, a single line of code triggering a looped background function titled MirrorLog. The code wasn't collecting what Naomi did. It was predicting what she would do, based on patterns, inputs, and choices. Lorraine's breath caught. This wasn't behavioral observation. It was behavioral simulation. Then came the final twist of the knife. A knock at her office door. She spun around, startled. Standing in the doorway wasn't a stranger. It was Jeremy. Or, at least the man she had known as Jeremy. But something was off. He was calm. Too calm. His expression oddly detached, eyes scanning the room like a threat assessment drone. He held a small, black case in his left hand, and when he spoke, it wasn't the friendly, familiar voice she was used to hearing. "Lorraine," he said softly, "I need you to come with me. Naomi's in a secure location, but if you keep pulling on threads, you're going to make things worse." She backed away instinctively. "Who are you?" she asked, voice low. He tilted his head slightly. "You already know the answer to that." And just like that, everything she thought she knew about her school, her coworkers, her students, even her own memory, began to unravel. What if this had never been about a missing girl? What if it was about testing something on the mall? And what if she had unknowingly been part of it the whole time? The lights flickered. The screen on Naomi's tablet glowed again. And somewhere, buried deep in the code, a new line appeared. Second phase initialized. Lorraine barely slept that night. Her home, once a refuge of peace and routine, felt like a surveillance hub with walls that listened and shadows that watched. Every noise outside the window jolted her awake. The old floorboard creaking in the hallway, was it just settling, or had someone stepped on it? She clutched the tablet to her chest as if it were the last remnant of sanity, a tether to Naomi and to the truth. But what was the truth now? That the people she trusted had lied? That her job, the one she'd poured her soul into, had been a front for a behavioral experiment involving children? That Naomi was gone, hidden, and possibly being used as a tool in something much darker than she could comprehend? It all swirled around her, suffocating, until her phone buzzed just after sunrise. It was Jeremy. Only this time, he didn't try to soften his voice or play the concerned coworker. "You have a choice to make," he said, calm but firm. "There's a car outside your house. If you get in, you'll be taken somewhere safe. You'll be given full immunity, a non-disclosure agreement, and you'll be reassigned, new city, new school, new life. If you stay well, you've seen how quickly things fall apart." Lorraine stared out the window, and sure enough, a dark SUV sat idling by the curb. "What about Naomi?" she asked. "What happens to her?" The pause on the line lasted just long enough to signal the real answer. "You don't want to get in the way of what's already in motion, Lorraine." And just like that, she was faced with a choice that no educator, no protector, no human being should ever have to make. Walk away and save herself, or fight back and risk losing everything, including the last child who had tried to speak the truth. She didn't answer. She hung up the phone and turned off every device in the house. Then she went to the school. It was a Saturday, but she knew the maintenance staff would be in and out. She slipped into her office through the back, heart pounding in her throat. She had to confront someone who still might be on her side. Or, at least used to be, Janice. If she was going to do this, she needed to look her in the eye, to find out once and for all what Janice knew and whether she could be trusted. But when Lorraine reached her classroom, the door was already cracked open. Inside, Janice stood frozen at her desk, flipping through a folder Lorraine recognized from the locked records room. Janice looked up, startled, guilt written all over her face, but not the guilt of someone caught in betrayal. It was the guilt of someone caught between fear and survival. "I tried to warn you," she said softly. "I wanted to tell you everything. But you don't understand what they're capable of. You think this ends with Naomi? There's more. Files. Logs. They've been doing this in other schools, Lorraine. Ours was just one of the first." Lorraine stepped forward, voice low but sharp. "So why now? Why were you in on it? Why didn't you leave?" Janice's eyes filled with tears, and that's when she said something that turned the knife even deeper. "Because it started with my son." Lorraine's breath caught. Janice had never talked much about her son, only that he'd struggled in school, had behavioral problems, needed extra support. "He was one of the original pilot subjects," Janice whispered. "They offer me help, said they could track patterns, predict meltdowns, reduce outbursts. I didn't know they were testing memory alteration, emotional mapping, compliance response algorithms. And then one day, he didn't remember me. Not like before. Just stared at me like I was a teacher, not his mom. And when I threatened to pull him out of the study, they showed me how easy it would be to make him forget me completely." Lorraine could barely stand. She'd come looking for answers, but this was deeper than she'd imagined. "They're rewriting who these kids are," she said, horrified. Janice nodded. "And you're next. They don't want you involved anymore. You've already disrupted the second phase. If you don't sign the NDA, they'll say you had a breakdown, that you falsified documents, that you're unstable around children." The implications hit her like a train. She was being set up. Everything they needed to discredit her, her school records, her personal information, her emotional state, was already in their control. Her only leverage was Naomi's tablet. But for how long? Suddenly, the intercom above crackled. The building-wide PA system, which hadn't worked in years, let out a high-pitched buzz before a distorted voice cut in. It wasn't anyone they recognized. "We see you, Lorraine. Time's almost up." The sound stopped, but the meaning lingered in the air like smoke after an explosion. Lorraine had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. She looked at Janice. "I'm not leaving. Not until I find Naomi. Not until I know who's really behind this." Janice didn't stop her. She didn't argue. She just walked over, pulled open a cabinet, and handed Lorraine a worn manila folder with a red stamp. Phase 1, Behavior Sync Archives. Inside were the names of every student, every parent who signed away their rights, every teacher who helped keep the program going. And one more file at the bottom. Lorraine's name. The room swayed. She wasn't just a witness. She'd been part of it all along, and someone had gone to great lengths to keep her from remembering that. The final question echoed in her mind louder than ever before. What exactly had they made her forget? And why was she starting to remember now? The storm had rolled in without warning, casting the town in a moody, electric darkness that matched every racing thought in Lorraine's mind. She drove with no clear direction, the manila folder pressed tight against the passenger seat like a sacred relic she wasn't ready to open again. The pages inside had revealed the final connection: names, dates, digital signatures, and one video file that wouldn't stop playing in her head. A grainy recording of a training seminar dated 5 years back, long before she'd even been offered the job at Pine Ridge Elementary. On the screen, a man stood before a room of eager administrators, explaining how student behaviors could be predictively shaped through nonverbal stimuli and selective digital reinforcement. But it wasn't the man's voice that chilled her, it was his name badge. Dr. Marcus Holloway, behavioral architect. The same Marcus who now chaired the county education board. The man who had personally recruited Lorraine, saying she was the kind of leader schools needed in the post-pandemic emotional landscape. She had to confront him. There was no one else left. Janice had vanished. The tablet had been remotely wiped, just as she feared. But Lorraine still had the original files, copied onto a drive she wore on a chain around her neck like a pendant. Every moment of Naomi's documented experiences. Every manipulation. Every recording. Enough evidence to turn a school district upside down. The building she entered wasn't a school, but a tech center hidden beneath the guise of a behavioral wellness institute. She'd only ever seen it in passing: glass walls, concrete walkways, a lobby that screamed clinical silence. But tonight, it was dimly lit, the guard booth unmanned, the sliding doors humming ominously as they opened on their own. Lorraine walked in, holding the folder in one hand, and the truth in the other. He was waiting for her in the observation room, just like she'd imagined. Marcus Holloway, older now, thinner, more polished. He didn't flinch when she stormed in. He didn't even look surprised. "You figured it out," he said flatly, as though he'd been rehearsing this moment for months. "I wonder how long it would take once Naomi reached out." Lorraine stepped forward. "Where is she? What did you do to her?" Marcus leaned against the desk, motioning toward the wall of monitors behind him. Each screen showed different school campuses, different children. Naomi was a prototype, a mirror, a litmus test. We gave her more awareness than the others, a chance to see what we were doing and ask the right questions. She passed. Lorraine's heart dropped. Passed. She was removed and relocated, Marcus said. She's being trained now to guide others through the system. She's not in danger, Lorraine. She's part of the solution. Lorraine could barely contain the fury building inside her. You turned children into lab rats. You rewrote their minds. You stole pieces of who they are and buried it under layers of programming. And now you want to make her your mouthpiece? You think you're saving the world, but you're playing God. Marcus smiled. And yet here you are. You're angry, but you still came. You want to burn it all down? Or are you here because part of you sees the logic? You remember more than you admit. Don't you, Lorraine? She froze, because deep down, some small part of her did remember. The offer she'd received during her early years as a trauma counselor. The research project she'd reviewed late one night and signed onto under the promise of revolutionary methods. The blackouts. The forgotten seminars. And most importantly, her own evaluations of Naomi. She had written those reports. She had helped craft the system, without even knowing it. But the guilt didn't stop her from what came next. She pulled the flash drive from her necklace and held it up. This has everything. And it's already been backed up and sent to someone who'll know what to do with it. You can't bury this anymore. Marcus's face twitched just slightly, a crack in the calm. You're bluffing. Am I? She said. Then try me. The silence between them pulsed with danger. Then, from behind the glass, the lights flickered and a new monitor clicked on. Naomi's face appeared, not live, but from a pre-recorded message. She sat at a desk, her eyes wide and urgent. If you're seeing this, the recording began, then Ms. Lorraine didn't stop. And that means you didn't either, Dr. Holloway. You told me truth was dangerous. But I think lies are worse. I hope the right people see this. I hope they know what's really happening in our schools. Marcus lunged for the console, but Lorraine beat him to it, slamming her hand down on the control pad and yanking the power cord from the wall. Sparks flew. Sirens began to blare. You never planned for anyone to fight back, she said. But you underestimated what happens when one child chooses to speak up and one adult decides to believe her. The building lights went red. Emergency lockdown activated. Lorraine backed toward the exit as Marcus shouted after her. This isn't over. You're just another piece in the pattern. We accounted for rebellion. Even you. Especially you. She turned to leave, heart racing, but as she reached the door, a final monitor clicked on. A different video file, dated just 4 months earlier. It showed Lorraine sitting across from Marcus in a room just like this one. Her voice played through the speakers. So, I won't remember any of this? Not even agreeing to the trial? Marcus's voice replied, calm and confident. No. But when it starts to return, you'll know it's time. She staggered backward, every nerve in her body on fire. Because she hadn't just helped design the system. She had volunteered to forget it. And now, the final question burned in her mind. What else had she chosen to forget? The days that followed were a blur of motion and memory, each moment dragging Lorraine deeper into a reality that felt more like a dream twisted by secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to remember. The story broke within 48 hours. Leaked documents, child behavior manipulation programs, covert psychological testing within school systems, and the quiet disappearance of key district officials. News anchors couldn't say enough about the scandal. Whistleblower teacher exposes education experiment, and hidden brainwashing in public schools became the top trending headlines across YouTube and every major platform. But as the media storm raged, Lorraine kept herself hidden, not because she feared retaliation, though that danger loomed, but because she needed time to understand what she had become a part of. There was peace in isolation, but no comfort. Naomi was safe, according to the agency that had intercepted her video, and now lived under a different name in a different state. She had been offered therapy, schooling, and protection. But when Lorraine tried to reach out directly, she was met only with silence and a single message. You already helped. Don't look back. That sentence haunted her more than any of the files she had uncovered. It confirmed what she had long feared. There were still pieces of this story locked away inside her, suppressed by a process she once believed was ethical. Every time she tried to write down what she remembered, more questions surfaced. How many other teachers had been part of the program? How many children were changed without ever knowing? And worst of all, who was still running the pieces that hadn't been shut down? One night, while scrolling through anonymized message boards connected to educational reform groups, she saw it, a new post under a username she didn't recognize, but a tone she couldn't mistake. It read, "Not all programs were discontinued. They just rebranded. Watch your district's curriculum rollouts. They've changed the logos, not the methods." Lorraine knew then that while her part in the story might be finished, the larger machine was still grinding forward, slicker, quieter, more adaptive than ever. But what had changed, irrevocably, was her. She no longer looked at a school bulletin board without questioning the colors used, the behavior incentives listed, or the sudden drop in student suspensions. She didn't walk into a parent-teacher meeting without studying the digital forms handed to her. She listened closer when children talked about how they just felt like being good today. And she began documenting, cataloging, watching, not as a paranoid relic of a conspiracy theory, but as someone who had seen the proof. And though she lived cautiously, Lorraine knew fear alone wouldn't protect anyone. That's why she started writing again, not in a report or a database, but in stories. Fiction at first. Coded metaphors. A teacher who suspects something strange in her classroom. A child who hears voices guiding them through multiple choice questions. A school that never turns off its hallway lights. They were stories meant to spark curiosity, not alarm, meant to be discovered by those who had started noticing the same patterns. It was her quiet way of passing the torch, of saying you're not crazy to anyone brave enough to ask why. And in those stories, buried beneath the suspense and the shadows, she left a final message, one Naomi would have understood. The most dangerous program isn't the one that changes your thoughts. It's the one that convinces you they were never yours to begin with. Years from now, maybe someone else will find one of those stories, tucked between the trending uploads on YouTube or read aloud in a podcast about forgotten educational experiments. Maybe they'll pause, scroll back, and feel that flicker of déjà vu. And in that moment, when truth feels familiar but nameless, they'll understand what Lorraine did on that stormy night. That remembering is the first act of rebellion. And asking the right question is the spark that changes everything.